What's up everyone, I'm here with the 2023 Yamaha R7. This is a twin cylinder bike boasting 74 horsepower and 50 foot-pounds of torque. On the bike itself weighing 418 pounds wet, so it doesn't weigh a whole lot, it doesn't make a whole lot of power. This bike is meant for the beginner or someone that is just taking just for a track bike, but it isn't a bike that's going to give you a whole lot of drama with a whole lot of power. It's very smooth, it's very predictable. And at a price point of $9,000, it's also very cheap. Competing with bikes like the RS660, which has 100 horsepower and a little more feature rich. It does cost a little bit more, the 660, but this bike is more on the cheaper end. And of course the Yamaha, everyone loves Yamaha as far as reliability goes. Just the name, I've had a lot of Yamahas myself. So I can't wait to ride this thing and do some before and after testing. We're gonna do dyno testing. We're gonna do 20 through 100 GPS data to see what we've done before and after tuning. So let's see what we can gain with this bike.
All right, and we're here on the first ride with the Yamaha R7 2023 version. And to start off with, the bike is extremely comfortable, ergonomically, very nice, comfy riding position. It is a sport bike still, but I still feel comfortable enough where I can ride this thing for long, extended periods of time. Even the suspension feels a little bit squishy, kind of like a road mode on the S1000RR, maybe a little more stiff than that, but it could definitely use some stiffening up if you're taking this bike to the track 100%. The actual power itself, of course, is lacking. Let's see what we got here. So first gear, there we go, 30 miles an hour. Give it everything right now. Yeah, see, that's about everything it's got right there. So it's not a big powerhouse, having less than 100 horsepower, but it is a nice cruise around. And the main purpose people get this bike for is going to be two reasons. Either they're just starting out riding and they want to make sure that they're comfortable on the bike before they jump onto 1,000, or they're people that want to take this bike to the track because it's, you know, what, 9,000 bucks this thing. So it's not a crazy loss if you got this loss the track as it would be, let's say, if you have a Ducati SP2 that costs $50,000. While the SP2 feels amazing in any kind of track setting, this R7 still gives you a lot of great feeling at the track. It's just not a track monster, but it can get you some really good habits at the track for your throttle tip-ins and stuff like that. And a Ducati, with a Ducati on the track, you're looking at, like, basically, if you're in mid-turn, you hit a bump or something, you actually twitch the throttle too much, man, you're in the gravel super fast you're in the gravel. Whereas this bike is super forgiving. I mean, super forgiving. You can go full throttle through pretty much every turn in this thing and it's not going to buck you off. It's going to be predictable. And this bike doesn't suffer from the same restrictions that we're seeing from a lot of the BMWs and other leader bikes that have these massive fall-offs and power up top. I mean, to be honest, this thing sounds like, I don't know, I guess I can compare it to like a pissed off generator. Well, not even pissed off, maybe a generator that's just having a bad day, you know, or having, I don't know, maybe the boss gave him a backhanded compliment, he's feeling some type of way about it. That's how this exhaust feels, or how the bike sounds. It's just very quiet, kind of purrs. It isn't really like an assault on the senses like you get from like a leader bike, for example. But again, we're not on a leader bike, we're on something that is less than 700 cc's. And its purpose isn't to make brutal sound, brutal power, this, all that. It's mainly meant for like a starter bike, like a beginner bike, I would say, or a track bike. Now, I have no quick shifter on this bike, so a lot of the time I'm just gonna have to clutchless shift this thing, just kind of, you know, I can get into gears that way, no problem. I can even downshift that way if I need to. But it's a little harder. This throttle does have some weird play. There's like this beginning part where it reminds me of a Ducati, where they have this weird throttle play at the beginning of the throttle, and it's kind of annoying, especially when you're just kind of cruising around and you want to get on the throttle, but there's this blank space in the throttle. Maybe Yamaha has something, or people have aftermarket something to tighten that throttle up, but that's the first thing I did with a Ducati. They have these throttle spacers with the Ducati that fix it right up, make it feel like it's supposed to feel. The screen itself is very small, no options, there's no track modes or anything. It's a very simplistic setup on this bike. Stop and go on this bike is really civil. Feels like it's super nice, just cruising around. Low speed stuff's really nice. The throttle inputs are predictable, nice. There's no weird jerkiness in the throttle. It just feels good. Clutch feels fine. Brakes feel a little bit numb, if I'm being honest, like just a little bit. I don't know what the story with that is. I'm just not getting a whole lot of feel from them. So I'm gonna take this thing over to get some top end stuff, see what this thing can do up in the turns, see how it feels, and I'll be back with you guys here. All right, found some high speed stuff. So let's see how this thing acts where it's supposed to be like on a track, basically. And of course, as expected, there's a very light feel to it. The 600 makes perfect sense. It's where these bikes shine, basically. Again, not liking the brakes so much on this bike. It does feel nice and flickable. Back end shoots out a little bit on downshifting. I should really rev match it. I'm just used to downshifting with the blipper. The one thing you don't want to do on these bikes is get low in the RPM, because it's not like 1,000 where you can just power the mid-range through it. Tip in feels good. Once you get the hang of that throttle where there's basically nothing in the first inch of it, it feels decent. The bike feels nice and balanced, confidence. Oh yeah. Come on, give me everything, baby. Give me everything. It's definitely fun. I can imagine for a first-time rider or something like that, this bike would be insane. Our novice to the track, it's not a whole lot of drama. Like I said, very confidence inspiring, very predictable. The power is very forgiving. Great bike. As expected. A lot of fun. This doesn't give you that terror feeling you get from 1,000 where it's like, oh my god, I'm gonna die. When you hit 1,000, you're about to accelerate or something, and you come out of a turn and it whips the tire out of a turn. It just feels nuts when you're doing that. But very nice. Awesome bike for the track. Seriously, awesome bike. Or even just for a beginner. Alright, well that was fun. Now let's go see what this thing does stock 20 through 100. I know I normally do 60 through 130, but this thing needs a lot of real estate to get to 130, so we're just going to do 20 through 100 and do a comparison through there before and after. Alright, we're here getting the stock 60 through 130 on the 2023 Yamaha R7. Here we go. You guys saw it, 20 through 100, 9.1 seconds, and you can see the acceleration comes out, then the curve just kind of flattens up top. This bike just doesn't have the power. It's 74 horsepower. That's not crank. That's I'm sorry. It's 74 horsepower at the motor, not the wheel. So it doesn't have the power to really push through that aerodynamic wall. When the wind starts hitting it over 100 miles an hour, it starts getting exponential the more you accelerate, basically, the faster you go. Pretty much what I expected. That's why I wanted to do a 20 through 100 instead of a 60 through 130, because I think this thing would just keep chugging along for a while, because this is a bone stock, emissions compliant bike. Nothing has changed about it. Stock exhaust, everything. So I'm glad we did the 20 through 100, and I think we'll see some good gains on the dyno, or at least I hope we'll see some good gains on the dyno and a good gain on that 20 through 100 after we do everything. So some final thoughts here about the bike. Overall, I think the bike is a great bike for someone that has their first bike, or just like, you know, 600, 700s in general. It's great for that. It's great for a track bike. I think there's a lot of potential in this bike. We can fix the suspension, do some different brake stuff. I think it could be a really fun track bike for pretty cheap. I mean, when all things considered, you buy a $50,000, you know, liter bike these days, or a $30,000 to $50,000 liter bike, depending on what you get. This is a nice compromise for the track at, you know, $9,000. You know, you're not breaking the bank to get it. It definitely has minimal everything on this bike. I definitely like these 90s style chrome levers, you know. They could have just done them black, you know. There's some things they could have just done, would have made it a lot easier. That I don't think would have like raised the price so much of the bike, you know. Like I said, the bike's extremely comfy. I could ride this thing for probably a couple hours. The seating position can be aggressive if you sit back in it and lay down on the tank, but also just riding ergonomically. I'm not doing a push-up like I am on a Ducati, for example. So we're going to take this thing to the dyno right now. We're going to see exactly what we can get out of it. I think we can definitely squeeze a little bit more out of this thing. We'll do some testing, and I'll see you guys at the dyno. I'm going there right now.
I'm over here at Lee's Cycle in San Diego. Got our 2023 R7 on the dyno. We're going to see exactly what kind of power she makes stock and what kind of power we can get from modding. Let's get started. All right, testing is complete for the Yamaha R7, and let's take a look at the numbers here. As you can see, I'll try to get you guys a good shot here. We're not making a whole lot peak to peak, about 2-wheel horsepower. Of course, we're talking about a motor that obviously is not making a whole lot of power in the first place, and is completely, I mean, extremely restricted by its exhaust, which is the accounted for right here on the top end of it. In the mid-range, we're making 4 more wheel horsepower and wheel torque, which is great. And you can see our tuning carrying over the stock, which is in red, here in the blue. We also have the extended rev limiter at about 11,000 RPM, which helps us carry a wider power band. If we had a full exhaust system on this, as you can see, this is stock as a rock, 50 state compliant right there, stock exhaust. If we had the exhaust, that's the big restriction on this bike. We'd be able to carry this thing all the way out, basically out to here, make some good power. The mid-range, the throttle and everything like that we've advanced or we've actually fixed, should be a big gain on the road, especially this mid-range pickup. This should be a lot of fun on the street, just light to light, kind of cruising around. Even when you're in a racing situation, we'll see how the throttle is, but I'm gonna test that right now. So, let's get to it.
All right, guys, I'm back with post-flash R7, and this thing, honestly, feels so much better than it was stock. And I know we're looking at the dyno there and we're going, well, there's only like 2 horsepower peak to peak that we gain, but this bike just feels so much different. That mid-range pickup of 4-wheel horsepower and 4 torque really shines on this bike now, because typically I'm riding this bike around, I don't know, 4,000 to 7,000 RPM, and that's where we picked up that 4-wheel horsepower and 4-wheel torque. Again, this bike is completely stock. All we did was the tuning on it. Actually, I'll tell you guys, we put a little plate on the bike to make it breathe. There's a little snorkel on this thing on the top of the motor that really doesn't let it breathe whatsoever. So we're probably going to offer that with the Flash, but I'll be talking about that later. But yeah, this bike feels so much better. I mean, even in first gear now, it picks up a tire. That's too funny. Picks up a tire now. Before it would not pick up the tire in first gear. I mean, you could load the suspension and rock it back, and yeah, it'd pick up the tire, but now I just gas it, just sitting here upright, gas it, and the tire actually picks up now. The motor sounds different. That's probably due to the plate that we installed here that's allowing more air into the engine. The real bottleneck, however, on this bike is going to be the exhaust system. The stock exhaust system is absolutely ridiculously restricted. I'll put a dyno up here of what it looks like with an exhaust system on it. Not this bike, but another 23 R7. I can show you that. It's insane how much the difference is, how much uncorking the exhaust does this. Now, of course, this bike doesn't have the exhaust, it's bone stock, so I can't test that, but other people have, and you can see the top end just carries so much power. You're probably gaining 5 to 7 horsepower on top of what we gained here, and a little bit more in the mid-range. I mean, listen to this motor right now. Man, it sounds so good now. It just has this rumble to it, but of course, if you had a full exhaust system, it would add a lot more to it. This is a great setup now. I can feel a noticeable difference. So we're gonna take this bike over to the top end stuff right now and test what this feels like now with that extra, was it 2 horsepower up top? But I feel like the benefit in the mid-range is gonna help, so I don't have to keep this thing wound up so high in the RPM range just to get a little bit of a thrill out of the bike. That rumble's so nice from the motor now. During the dyno testing, we put a little plate on this bike to replace the snorkel that's under the seat. It breathes through this straw looking thing. So we just open that up, put that on there. It makes a really nice sound for the motor, and coupled with an exhaust system, it'll make some good power. We may offer this with the Flash, just kind of like, this is the plate, here's the Flash, put it all together with an install. Overall, I'm seeing no compromise in rideability. That sounds so good. Overall, I'm not seeing a compromise in rideability whatsoever on this bike. As far as the tuning goes, the flashing, everything feels good. The only thing we're gaining here is power, which is the one thing this bike is for sure lacking on. I mean, big time lacking on power. And it's really surprising to me how such a little number, you know, 66 to 68 horsepower that we're getting. This guy's trying to race me here. It's surprising me how so little power, 66 to 68, means so much on a bike this light. I mean, this bike is wet, low 400s. I think it's 418 wet, which, you know, my S1, or sorry, our S1000RR, our M1000RR, it's probably sub 410, somewhere like 408 or something like that wet, somewhere around that neighborhood with the mods we have on it to lighten it up. This bike, of course, hasn't been lightened or anything. It's 418, and with a bike that's making this little bit of power, every pound counts. So we got to pull all the weight off the bike. That'll make this bike faster, or utilize the low power it has better. And I think even with the top end that we've got on it now, it will definitely feel better past 100 miles per hour. Every little bit of power, like I said, counts. I'm gonna pick up some gas right now and then head over to the top end stuff. All right, we made it to the top end testing. We get around this slow guy. So far, the throttle feels really good now. Well, in comparison to before. We got that extended red line, which helps me get further into the RPM band without shifting. Definitely has a more aggressive sound to it, 100%. The mid-range, it like almost just growls at you. Throttle transitions, low speed, good. Here's the low speed stuff. Yeah, feels good. Feels really nice. hear it barking now. The bike's just so forgiving. And the mid-range feels so nice now. It was really lacking before. Like you had to keep this thing completely wound up. Not the case so much anymore. I mean, I still keep it pretty wound up, but it's feeling good. Oh yeah, feels a lot better. It's so amazing what just a little bit of tuning can do to this thing. Even the numbers that don't look impressive. 4-wheel horsepower, 4-wheel torque in the mid-range, and then a couple horsepower up top. It's just so crazy how that feels so much better on this bike. They'll lift the tire up at first. I mean, I definitely give it some beans, but it'll lift the tire up now. Before it would not do that. I'd be lucky if it just unload the suspension almost. Yeah, definitely a lot more fun to ride now, especially up top, mid-range, getting light to light. It just makes this bike more exciting. Whereas before it was just, I don't know, it just felt so boring. I guess one way to put it. Feels pretty decent now. Of course, in the turns and everything, you can really just beat this thing up in any turn and it's not going to turn against you, man. I mean, it's very predictable. All right, well, now that we've seen what it can do on the top end, let's see some real data here. Let's see the 60 through 130 post flash so we can compare that to stock. All right, we're ready for the post flash 60 through 130, getting set up here with the Dragy, and let's go get it. All right, here we go. We managed to get an 8.3 second 20 through 100, which is better than the 9.1 second 20 through 100 it did stock. That is 0.8 of a second faster. That's really impressive. Again, considering only a 2-wheel horsepower gain peak to peak, but again, like we said before, that's not the whole story. We got the new mid-range, we've got pickup from torque, we've got throttle gains, de-restriction. We did a whole bunch of stuff to make that number for a bone stock bike. And it shows. That 60 through 130 is 0.8 of a second faster. That's nuts, to be honest with you, for such little gains. It just goes to show you that when something is this light and the motor is this small, the little gains really count. Like little gains. If this was a car and it gained 2 horsepower, you wouldn't notice a damn thing. But because it's so light, because the motor's so small, these gains are significant on this bike. So to wrap up everything here, I think the Flash is really good on this bike. Honestly, it makes it so much more fun, picks up so much power in the mid-range. That alone makes it worth it. The bike's now growling at me, has an aggressive motor sound, and of course, again, stock exhaust. Normally that's all you'd hear on this bike if you threw one on here, but we've got the stock one, so I'm hearing this motor loud and clear. Stock versus Flash, it is definitely louder. We pulled up all the restrictions, got the air-fuel ratio correct, messed with the ignition, extended the RPM limiter about 500 RPM more to kind of extend the power band, less shifts at the track for all those track guys, and just gained some power. Overall, I think the Flash definitely is worth it. We're not getting crazy gains like we got in the S1000RR. But this bike is now doing stuff that it wasn't doing before, you know? Good things. It's a lot more power, it's a lot more mid-range. I'm not relying on keeping it at the high RPM. I can do a mid-range, leave it in 5th gear here and just kind of cruise around, and it can get around things now. It gets out of its own way, whereas before, it was kind of a struggle just to get around with the bike. In the mid-range, for example, you'd have to kind of wind it out, and it was a chore. Now this bike just feels a lot more fun. Feels like it should have came from the factory. Let's put it that way. So I think that's going to do it for our review today on the R7, and I'll see you guys on the next bike.